Remarks or comments?
Will we go to the public? Good evening.
Good evening.
For the record, my name is Mike Goman. I'm principal at Goman, New York Property Advisors. With me tonight are Rob Ralston. Rob, if you put your hand up. Rob was previously the Director of Community Planning and Development in West Hartford and was sort of one of the fathers of Blue Axe Square. So knows that project very, very well, and I'll give him a minute to talk a little bit about some of the background on Blue Axe and how it's relevant to what we're discussing here tonight. Also Don Poland. Don Poland is our Senior VP of Urban Planning, well-known planner, long track record in urban planning, currently working on his doctorate in urban planning at the College of London. In a few minutes I'll be happy to answer some questions, but I just want to go through a couple of the things that I think are relevant and maybe respond to some of the comments made earlier. I don't want to go through our analysis all over again in its entirety. I don't think that's going to help anybody. You've had some time to look at it. But let me start with a couple of comments. One, that I want to reaffirm that we think that the City of Bristol has done absolutely terrific work in acquiring and demolishing this old property. As I said in my presentation a month or so ago, that's really courageous, groundbreaking economic development, visionary, foresight, and that's terrific. Our hat goes off to you. We don't see that, and we work in a lot of communities. I also want to reaffirm our comments in our report about the Renaissance Downtowns of Bristol team. No question, these are very experienced people, very professional people. They did a good job. We disagree with them on a lot of their conclusions, and we'll talk about that and have a chance to kind of discuss that. But there's no question they're very experienced people. I also want to restate that as you saw in our conclusions, we don't believe that the Phase 1A proposed project makes good sense. And I can summarize that simply by saying that we think that the city's participation in that project on the conditions and on the terms that have been described would be at best a high-risk endeavor, that there is a significant chance of failure. And we'll talk about the numbers in a minute here, but if they don't meet their leasing projections, the project goes from barely a 3% return to something a lot less than that. And perhaps most importantly, that even when the project, or if the project does get built and fully leased up, we don't believe it's going to have the desired catalytic effect. Now, keep in mind, what we were asked to look at was Phase 1A. We did look at the master plan. We did look at other things. We understand the vision, if you want to call it that. But what we were asked to look at strictly was essentially the terms and conditions of Phase 1A as it's proposed. And that's what we looked at when we said that if you build that project with an investment, substantial investment on the part of the city, fully a third of the cost of the entire project, we still don't think it's going to have the desired catalytic effect that you're looking for. Last general comment I would say is that the vision that Renaissance has for this, what they call their piazza, the significant public space, that's consistent with our conclusions. And as the gentleman ahead of me pointed out, we talked about placemaking. We had seen their comments about placemaking. We wanted to revisit that and recommend that. We think this is a great site to create that kind of venue, and we think that done properly, and we're going to disagree whether or not you can do it at the scale that we're talking about, but done properly, that it can serve as a catalyst for the redevelopment of the surrounding properties. But the important point is the surrounding properties, and by that I mean properties that aren't on this site or to be built on this site, but properties adjacent that can be bought and renovated. But let me correct the record on a couple of things. I'm not sure why that slide was put up that said that we hadn't reviewed all these things and they had a whole list. We were given all of that information. We reviewed it and we listed that in our report. If you go to our report, we have a long list of the materials that we did report. Our report clearly states that. We may not agree, as I said earlier, with some of the conclusions, but we did review all that material. Another comment I would make on the record is that Blue Axe Square we don't think is a fair comparable, and it would be deceptive to really focus on that and whatever performance numbers that project is having as a good analog for what we're talking about doing here, what you're talking about doing here. It's a one-of-a-kind project that you only get to build in certain very specific markets with income and density that meets certain criteria and a terrific location. You want to be very, very careful about using that as your analog. We looked at 35 projects. In the Zimmerman-Volk analysis, they listed a bunch of projects, somewhere around 30 projects, I recall, and when they were talking about comparable rents. We did the same thing. We didn't use the same list of projects. Instead, we looked at projects looking at employment, who's working in Bristol and who coming from another town, and we have all that data. We can pull that data up, and we said those are people who might make a decision to find a residence here in town. If they work here and they're driving in some distance, maybe we can give them an option to live here. So we looked at towns that had significant numbers of people traveling here from the town that they live in, and we looked at the reverse. We looked at people who are traveling here out of town and looked at employment nodes and started to do calculations around drive times and said, given a better alternative, price and features and so on, would they live closer in, even though they may be driving out of town to work. So we looked at 35 projects. The comment was made that the Zimmerman-Volk, he expressed disbelief that our trade area was based on drive times. If you recall the presentation, we talked about walkability. We talked about 10 to 14 blocks of walkable distance from this. And let me quote from Zimmerman-Volk study. They talk about leased properties which can be leased or sold in the downtown Bristol study area, and that's in caps. The downtown study area is bounded by North Street in the north, Maple Avenue, the railroad tracks, Main Street and Mellon Street to the east, South Street in the south, and West Street to the west. Now, if you were to map that out and compare that to what we used, the study area that we used is very aligned very closely with the study area that Zimmerman-Volk used. We're very familiar with Zimmerman-Volk's work. We've used them on occasion in certain situations. They're very, very good. There's no question about that. We use virtually the same methodology. They happen to use a company's data called Nielsen Claritas. We use Esri's Tapestry version, which is what I showed you the last time. We use IRS mobility data, just like they use IRS mobility data. And if you were to look at our data and compare it sort of page by page to the methodology they used, you're going to find it's very, very similar. So the notion that somehow their study and our study in that regard are substantially different is just not correct. Another thing I want to talk about briefly is they talk about how we got I think his phrase was, we got the size of the units wrong, or we were talking about something that he didn't understand. Well, if you look at the Zimmerman-Volk study, they talk about units as low as 350 to 450 square feet. Now that's a very small unit. If you look at their one-bedroom units, they're very small. We looked at the spectrum of existing property, these 35 properties that I mentioned as well as others, and said, well, what's the average square footage? You need to be in the market. You can't charge the same amount of money for something that's two-thirds the size, typically, unless you've got an enormously successful project like a Blueback Square. But when you get down to 350 to 450 square feet, you're well below the market average. The market average is about 600 square feet, quite a bit larger than what they're predicting. So they get to a rent number that makes sense, dollar for dollar rent number, and that's the way people rent. They rent per month. They say, I'm prepared to pay $1,100 or $900 or whatever it is a month. They really don't look at it on a per square foot basis, and we understand that. But they will not pay $900 a square foot for something that's half or two-thirds of the size that they can get elsewhere, all else being equal, amenities and so on. So they get to that number, their rent number that seems to line up, by taking the unit size down to a very small and well below market unit size. And their own data shows that. If you go to the Zimmerman-Volk data and look at the square footages of all the other competitive projects they look at, there is nothing even close to that 350 to 450. I think they have one project that's down as low as 500 square feet. So you can do this with the numbers, but you want to be very, very careful of what you're doing, because in the world that we live in, we work with banks all the time on underwriting this kind of thing. This stuff has to make sense. It has to make financial sense. We agree with each other, essentially, on the need for activity surrounding the site. That's critical. We're on board with that completely. There's no question that's an important part. And we talk about that in the context of revisiting what they already revisited in terms of placemaking. And that's still a very good idea. At the end of the day, if you go to their numbers, and the numbers that they have in their package on April 24th, they built a project that cost them $17.7 million. And in the fourth year after it opens, when the rents have started to come up, the project's worth $12 million. We don't like, and we don't recommend to our clients that you typically are going to undertake to do that. Now, there were some other projects that were set up there, and they said, well, look, Blueback Square and Yukon and so on. I'm going to ask Rob Relson to talk about Blueback. But it's not apples to apples comparison. In a couple of cases, I want to let Rob talk about this, the difference in the market value, the difference in the contribution that was shown is in the form of parking garages and streets and infrastructure that were built by the town. So they weren't investing in the actual for rent property. They were investing in the infrastructure, and I'm going to ask Rob to come up here in a second. But the point here is, how many people want to spend $17 million to build something that's going to be worth $12 million when it's all done? We have real trouble recommending to you and to the taxpayers of Bristol that that's a good strategy. Now let me move on just briefly and talk a little bit about the differences between the housing study that Zimmerman Vogt did, and again, they do very, very good work. We have great respect for them. As was pointed out, they've done an awful lot of work. In fairness, I've been in this business 40 years. I think I can hold my own in terms of the number of projects that I've done, and I'm not a research guy. I'm a developer. I actually expect to be on the hook to get things done with our clients. That's what we do. But a critical point here is that the Zimmerman Vogt study is really focused on the overall market potential, and keep in mind that word potential. This is sort of looking at a high level. We do the same kinds of studies, so we know this very well. This is looking at a very high level, you know, who might be a candidate to live here, that sort of potential in a very broad sense. We do that, but we think it's very important to go from sort of what is really sort of pure research, if you will, to more of an applied research methodology, which is, for us, focusing more on what we know about the demand drivers for housing and how those demand drivers line up with the project that we're looking at, or we've been asked to analyze. So demand drivers, to put it simply, are things like, are you in an area that has good schools? If you're talking about single-family housing, huge demand driver for single-family housing. In multifamily and other forms of housing, as well as single-family, though, things like proximity to shops and services and the quality and the style, if you will, of those shops and services. Proximity to food and entertainment, and again, the quality and the style of the food and entertainment. Proximity to employment nodes, to strong nodes of employment. The feel, if you will, of the surrounding neighborhood. The demographic and socioeconomic makeup of the residents that are living in the project and around the project. The reputation of the surrounding neighborhood. That's an important factor when we're looking at demand drivers. Proximity to transportation, both in terms of roads and highways and in terms of mass transit routes, the mode and the type of mass transit that's available. Access to recreation opportunities, and that's not simply a swimming pool and a tennis court, but it's a lot of other things. You know, can people go out and play frisbee or whatever they want to do in an open area? It's a lot of things. Recreation encompasses a lot of things. The feel of the project from a design standpoint, the look, the amenities, the features, the layouts, the views that the project has, the ease of access. Can I get in and out of this thing easily? Parking and entrances, and lastly, the visibility from the project. So, you know, you have to move from a discussion, a very high-level discussion about potential, market potential, and you have to really start to drill down into those demand driver factors. You got to do both parts. You can't just talk about potential and say, gee, there are thousands of people out here who might be interested in living in a new place in Bristol, and we think we can get X%. That's really not the whole story. It's part of the story, certainly, but it's really not the whole story. So, look, our conclusions haven't changed. We think this proposal is somewhat of a field of dreams proposal. If we build it, they will come. That's maybe what you want to do. We don't think that these demand drivers tell a good story around supporting basically a project coming out of the ground, fully leased, at the highest market rents, among the highest market rents achieved in this entire metropolitan area. We just don't think the story sort of supports that. So let me ask Rob Relson now to come up. Maybe you can make a few brief comments, Rob, about the Blueback Square appearance.
Thank you very much, and good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the Commission and Council. I'm Rob Ralston. I work with Goman, York. I'm the Senior Vice President of Community and Economic Development for our team. I think it's a big topic, so I think I'll try to narrow the field down a little bit and get straight the story about Blueback Square. Long story, real fast. 1975, West Hartford Center went to sleep because West Farms Mall opened up. And it stayed asleep for 20 years, more or less. We always joked that you could throw a hubcap down Farmington Avenue at 6 o'clock at night and there would be nobody there. We had vacancies, we had light, we had 3 restaurants, none of which were doing any real evening business. I arrived about 1995 in West Hartford, and a couple of the first things we did was open up the zoning book so that we could bring in restaurants. Because prior to that, there were restrictions, technical in nature, that just didn't allow any more restaurants to the center. We put dining on the street outside. Interesting story, the council was very reluctant because they were afraid our residents were going to get dirt and grit on their food before they ate. It took a while to explain to them that it wasn't really what we were going to be concerned about with regard to this. 1997, Nordstrom's comes to West Hartford Center, to West Farms Mall, which would have been a real killer for the center. You know, we had lost the department store. We'd lost all the things that had been there. 97, the center organized. We organized the center. They spent $50,000 that year marketing themselves, TV ads, billboards, radio, whatnot. Survived the opening of Nordstrom's, got some new restaurants to come in, most notably Rico, Elbow Room, followed closely there by, after that, by Max Oyster. And that's really what started to turn it up, and we were able to build a lot of public relations work was done, a lot of beautification was done, a lot of investment on the town's part was done, and we get to the point where we have to now turn to, knowing all the time, we're going to turn to the east side of the center, where these derelict buildings are, under multiple ownerships that we can't get our arms around because we will not use, we would not use eminent domain to involve ourselves in that process. But we wanted to do what Bristol did because, frankly, I think Bristol did the right thing. You were able to get the cost, you were able to get the buildings, you were able to get the site clean, and that's what really needed to be done here. We were unable to do that. And the Blueback Square developers came, and we did take 6 years to get that rolling and get that into the ground. And we did spend, as a community, $48.5 million, very different than what you're being asked for. Your GO bonds, we provided the money through revenue bonds. And the simple difference in that is we had a revenue source that would support the bonds outside of the taxpayer dollar. That was the important part, a difference between the two. But also, as Mike noted, none of that money was spent on private investment. None of that money was part of the deal. That money bought 2 500-plus car parking garages in support of the project. It put a 17,000 square foot addition on our town center library and renovated that building. It renovated a portion of the town hall to accept and accommodate the Board of Education moving from the former town hall into this building. The former town hall became Crate and Barrel. Well, the former town hall was knocked down, and then Crate and Barrel was built. And we built a road. We built sidewalks and infrastructure to support the walking area, all of which was owned by us, and all of which was paid for by 2 sources. Source number 1 was all the parking revenue. Of course, we were in the parking business, so we kind of knew what that was going to look like. Source number 2 was the fact that we put this whole district that the Blueback Square became into a special development district. And we charged them in excess of $1.7 million annually outside and beyond and above the taxes that they pay. So our development had 3 sources of strong revenue: parking revenue, special assessment, special services district revenue, and then of course the tax revenues, all of which has exceeded itself. I should also tell you that in Blueback Square, the greatest trepidation on the part of the developer was building the residential. They didn't want to do it. In fact, late in the construction process, they came to us and said, we're going to change that building to offices. We don't want to build a residential. We're afraid of it. But we insisted because we knew you have to have residential in your downtown area in order to uplift your downtown area. And we needed to do that. And we knew, having done there for as many years as we have, that this was going to be highly desirable. If we got it open, we got occupants to the spaces. So we insisted that they do that. In fact, we put a caveat on our agreement with regard to the development that said, if within 18 months you don't have the condominium building under construction, we will start to tax you. You agree to pay taxes as if the building were built. We're very hard on developers over there, but it's a different kind of a project. So we didn't invest in the actual project itself. We actually invested in ourselves in order to enhance and grow that project and let it go out and come to be built. That's kind of the story there. I will also say, let me just offer a personal observation and comment. I think in order to live someplace, you have to have a reason. There has to be something good going on, have something strong. And that's what we worked on to create the brand in West Hartford, and that's what was ultimately successful for us. And if we had done it with the Blue Black Square project and one building at a time, I don't believe we would have any of the rest of this built at this point in time. You had to create enough so that there was gravity. Today, West Hartford Center has about 25 restaurants in it, all within a 2-block walking area. I don't know how many, just say 75, 50 restaurants, and that's terrific. We probably have that many in town too, but they're not related to what goes on in the downtown area. So that's kind of the story on Blue Black. If I can answer more questions, I'd be glad.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And just a quick closing comment. By the way, there is about 110, I think, or 108 residential units in Blue Black, Rob, about 59 condominiums for sale, 48, I think, for rent. Is that right? So 100 residential units in total. Don Poland, who's with me tonight, actually did a 900-page analysis of the rebirth of West Hartford Center and the incorporation of Blue Black Square, and he's dying to read it to you here tonight, but I told him he's not allowed. Just a closing comment. We are on the same side as Bristol Renaissance, or as Renaissance Downtowns of Bristol. We want what's best for the community. We hope that our report and our information provides good advice, help you think this through, and we'll be happy to answer more questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to quickly